Good afternoon. This is Mike Noble with Advanced Internet Technologies. I'm the marketing officer here, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today on dedicated private cloud. Before we get started, I would ask that you would mute your phones, and as you have questions, if you utilize the chat feature and type in or note any questions you may have, we'll certainly get to those and address those at the end of the presentation. In addition, we will be recording the webinar this afternoon, and we'll have that posted onto our AIT YouTube channel within about 72 hours, so there will be an opportunity to go back and review the information that we do cover again today. With that, I want to just do a brief overview for those of you who may not be familiar with Advanced Internet Technologies, AIT. We are located here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and are privately held business. In addition, the company was founded by Mr. Clarence Briggs, a disabled veteran. And since the inception, and we've grown over the past 20 years to be the largestly owned privately held web hosting business in the industry, with over 200,000 business domains and customers in 130 countries. You can see that this is just a list of some of the services we can provide, dedicated private cloud that we'll highlight today, but AIT can provide multiple products and services for your business. And with that, I'm going to do a transition and introduce Michael Roberts, who's our Chief Operating Officer.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Okay, what I wanted to talk about first here today is the challenges that we see from customers, and they can be a wide range of different types of problems, from website downtime to bad ROI, or their emails are not working. So these are just some of the things that that we see from time to time with customers approaching us for different service needs. One of the things that we do recommend for customers that are coming from a public cloud environment, or maybe looking to get into a cloud type environment, we talk about the dedicated private cloud. So in today's webinar, we want to talk specifically about that product in three specific areas that we'll talk about today. The first is the infrastructure, what it looks like, the actual hardware, software, things that are involved in the infrastructure. The second area will be the feature set. What can it do? What can it do? The third area will be the benefits. What does it actually provide you and give you from a feature standpoint? And then we'll also briefly talk about a case study that shows some examples of those things altogether. So let's first talk about the infrastructure and what it looks like. Obviously, there is hardware involved in any cloud solution. Somebody's got to host the hardware somewhere. So in this particular instance, I'm going to show you a dedicated private cloud single server installation. And that single server is, in this case, a Intel Xeon E3-1230 processor with 32 gigs of memory and 3 different hard drives, 2 of those drives being SSD, or solid state disk. This is kind of arbitrary. The individual server can be any number of configurations with multiple drives, RAID 5, but in this instance I wanted to highlight a scenario where we have just 3 drives and an E3-1230. So this is actually a relatively standard configuration for a single server environment. So what we do in this dedicated private cloud environment, the VMware Hypervisor operating system is installed on the 120 gig SSD, and then with that there is a 500 gig SSD that is set aside for production data. So this is where virtual machines will reside. And then next to that is the 1 terabyte SATA drive. That'll be used for backup. I'll show you a little bit more about that here in just a second. So building on the 500 gig SSD, we would build any number of virtual machines. And the virtual machine, the number of virtual machines could be 1 or 100. The number is immaterial at this point. The type of virtual machines are also completely up to you too. In this instance, we have CRM, one for CRM, one for email, one for your website or a company extranet, one that's listed for OwnCloud, or any number of types of virtual machines. So as those virtual machines are configured, installed, they could be Linux, Windows, Solaris, any type of operating system, and then the application can sit on top of that, and they are completely segregated from one another. The reason we have that 1 terabyte backup drive is, in this case, we're saying it can be done daily, but this could be done hourly or weekly or however often that you wanted to do. It could create a clone of that virtual machine and copy it to the SATA drive that's still residing in that same physical equipment. Notice that this drive configuration is not set up for RAID. And that's actually not a bad thing. The viability of SSDs and reliability of those drives is well documented. So from our standpoint, if there is a problem with that SSD, the production SSD, you do have that SATA drive as a backup that will immediately, you can actually start the virtual machine from that backup drive. So it actually doesn't need to be copied anywhere or moved or restored. You can just start up that virtual machine, and you are as you were at the time that the clone backup happened. So this is kind of a snapshot of a single server environment. We'll do a multi-server environment here in just a second, but I want to talk about some features before we get there. So the first one I want to talk about is vMotion and storage vMotion. With vMotion, it's essentially moving the memory and processing power for a specific virtual machine from one hardware environment to another. So all that is just saying, hey, I'm machine A, you're machine B. I'm going to pass you everything that's running in memory for this virtual machine, and when you have everything, then you own that VM, and that VM is then yours. Whereas storage vMotion is actually moving the location or the repository of the disk for that virtual machine. And that can be done machine to machine or array to array, depending upon the drive configuration that's selected. But those two features are very important as we move forward to multi-server dedicated private clouds. So the next slide I want to talk to you here about is high availability. And high availability is, you'll hear me refer to as HA. HA is basically the configuration that will automatically, based upon a failed server, use vMotion to migrate those virtual machines, those resources, to another physical server that's in a cluster. So this is a very, very important and key feature for multi-server dedicated private clouds, because it allows for redundancy and reliability. And this is where you're able to start getting to that 100% uptime type of scenario. There should be really no instance where you have any downtime if you have things for high availability. So this is an example of a dedicated private cloud multi-server with a storage environment. And then we've selected an Intel Xeon E5 processor server as a storage array. That's at the top. So those units can actually be used as storage devices as well. But this could be also a NetApp device, an EMC device, or any number of different types of enterprise storage devices. At the bottom, you'll see the two front-end hypervisors and their basic configuration. Again, this is somewhat arbitrary. These could be any type of machine, an E3, an E5, you name it. They could be any type of variety, with any amount of memory and drive configuration as well. But in this case, we just decided to install the hypervisor on the operating systems, and then all of the VMs are actually attached back to the storage array, and that's where they're booted from. So in this case, we have two VMs on the server that's on the left, and that server is operating, and it pulls the storage from the storage array that is set up in the top of the diagram here. But let's say that server fails and does not have connection anymore to that storage array. With HA configured, the VMs will automatically migrate to the other available server in the cluster and either boot back up, or if it's able to pass the memory and stay online, then it'll do that. So that's actually a simple way to explain an example of HA in a dedicated private cloud environment. So area 2 is the features and what it can do for you. So I'm going to list some of the features. There are a number, and there's a bunch of reasons why, but I at least wanted to get some of the things on one slide. So let's talk about scale. So a dedicated private cloud does scale. You can start with a single virtual machine on a single piece of hardware and then grow that to bigger hardware. Kind of it scales vertically and horizontally. You can make the hardware bigger that it sits on, and migration is very easy due to storage vMotion. But also you can do the cloning factor and scale it vertically, where you can have multiple virtual machines on a single physical machine. So scale is one important method or one feature that you're going to get with a dedicated private cloud. Also, management and managing the resources that you want. Either AIT can manage that for you, or you can actually manage the VMware cluster remotely through Virtual Center. From a compliance standpoint, obviously, if you are a publicly traded entity, you're very familiar with Sarbanes-Oxley. If you're processing credit cards, you're familiar with PCI. And if you're in the healthcare field, then you're surely familiar with HIPAA. And those compliance features aren't able to be done completely and without amendments in that public cloud environment. But because a dedicated private cloud environment is isolated to a single client, that compliance can be achieved based upon customizations, which ironically is the next feature that we wanted to talk about. And I mentioned that the hardware was pretty arbitrary in what we selected. You can pick and choose how much memory or processor or drive capabilities or configuration you have. So we're really very flexible when it comes to that. It just comes down to, once the hardware is selected, then we put it into motion with the configuration for the hypervisor. And then security, because of private cloud, it's dedicated to a single organization. All of those configurations are set to high levels of security, because we know exactly who's accessing them and where they're accessing from. So those are just some of the features that you'll get. I also wanted to talk about some of the applications that you could use on a dedicated private cloud. And this ranges from simple web hosting, Linux or Windows. In this case, we're talking about cPanel web hosting, but it could be Windows environments as well with ASP.NET. And any number of pieces of software like WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, or other custom configuration, custom websites. Also, another feature, another application that we see a lot of dedicated private cloud customers using is called OwnCloud. And if you're not familiar with OwnCloud, I encourage you to go check it out. Owncloud.org is the open source project. It's a free application server that is very similar to Dropbox. The software environment will allow you to use your own disk space, but connect it through a Dropbox-like feature. So there is a Windows, Linux, and Mac client that makes it look like it's a local storage, and then that automatically syncs to your server, your own cloud server. And so a lot of our customers, when they create a dedicated private cloud, they'll set one virtual machine aside as the virtual machine for OwnCloud, and set up some disk space for it. OwnCloud also has Android and Apple applications, so they can be used for mobile devices as well. This is also great if you have customers that are using very large files or sending large files via email. Your advertising agencies or print shops, those type of places would drastically benefit by not using email anymore and having customers upload and download large files via this method. So OwnCloud would be another application that could be installed on a dedicated private cloud. Another is Zimbra, the Zimbra Collaboration Suite, which basically there's a lot of different features to it, but the core of it is it's a great mail server and web interface for people that are managing email. So this comes inherently with IMAP or POP, and it integrates with Outlook and a number of other mail clients. It actually has its own mail client as well. And people that are using multiple devices usually love Zimbra. So if they're using a desktop computer and a laptop computer and a mobile phone or a tablet, and they're on the go and they never know where they're sending email from or receiving email from, this is actually one email account that syncs all of their email in one interface, and it is branded and customizable as well. So there's Zimbra as an option for email. Another application that we've seen customers use in that dedicated private cloud environment is Sugar CRM. If you're not familiar with Sugar, it's a kind of a Salesforce alternative. less expensive. There is a free version, community version, and then Sugar has a paid version as well that has support and a whole bunch of other features. But the free version is actually very expansive and has been integrated into a lot of business processes from our customers. One of the last features we'll talk about here from an application standpoint is actually putting Windows and Linux virtual machines on the same hardware, which is drastically reducing overhead costs for our customers. When they used to buy 2 dedicated servers, now they're just buying one and putting a hypervisor on there, and then they're able to run a Linux and Windows machine inside of one physical piece of equipment. Another benefit for that is when they back up, the snapshot backup like we've talked about before, that snapshot backup can be done on both Linux and Windows, so you don't have to back up Linux one way and Windows another. You're actually able to back up Linux and Windows and any type of OS the exact same way with a simple snapshot. So the third area that we'll talk about here was how does it benefit me? And this is a little bit abstract of a concept, but we wanted to kind of give some bigger picture to the public cloud environments and what's the difference between, let's say, Amazon Web Services and AIT's dedicated private cloud. So we'll talk here about, I'm going to use me as an example. I've decided to purchase some real estate. I've bought a condo building. It has 2 units, and now I have the ability to rent out those 2 units. And that's kind of, well, the comparison with private clouds or public clouds. I'm essentially renting, I'm buying a place that I can furnish and do what I want with, and I can rent it out and resell it, or I can sell it on my own or use it on my own. With a lot of public clouds, there's a piece of overhead that essentially comes in and says, you can't use part of the unit on the right. That's reserved. And that reservation of those resources means you can't sell them. So really, you can only sell or rent 1 and maybe 1/3 of a unit. And the reason for that is, in this case, I'll say that the people that I purchased the condo from, they said that they need to have part of one of the condos as a model. So obviously, I can't sell it or rent it if it's part of a model. And that's kind of what your larger public cloud folks do, like your AWS and Windows Azure. They're reserving those services, but they're reserving it and using it themselves. And that's for their provisioning systems and all the additional overhead that they use that automates their platform. Plus, as I mentioned before, it's not fully compliant when you talk about use of shared versus dedicated resources. And then you're going to get worse performance, and we'll show the performance out of that compared to dedicated private cloud here in a second. So in the AIT example of that dedicated private cloud, you're actually getting the whole thing. You're able to use and rent, resell, or benefit from both units in that condo, and you can use it as you wish and actually get the ROI for it as well. So let's talk quickly about a case study for a customer that came from AWS not that long ago, and they use the EC2 instances, which stands for Elastic Cloud version 2. Basically, those are like virtual machines, and what they ended up purchasing was 7 web servers that were EC2, and I think they were the double extra large size. They had 2 database servers and then 1 network management server. And that was kind of like their management station to push updates and do those type of things. The network response time for all those machines was 220 milliseconds with a standard deviation of 200 milliseconds. Basically what that means is they were either really, really fast or they were really, really slow. And there was a lot of in-betweens. And a lot of that is caused by the fact that it's essentially a shared public cloud environment, and that has to do with the resources that other people are using as well. When we got them moved over to AIT, they ended up not having to use all 7 web servers. They only used 3, still used 2 database servers and a network management server. And their network response time was down to 95 milliseconds with a standard deviation of 20 milliseconds, partially because, not solely, but partially because they were dedicated to their own environment and their own bandwidth was dedicated to themselves. The next slide I want to show you talks about CPU benchmarks, and this is a very technical slide, but the highlights here are we used an application called SysBench, and that will run through a period of tests, and we actually have the tests listed there. And this shows with the EC2 instances versus that dedicated private cloud, that our processor performed better. This is subject to debate because Amazon Web Services for their EC2 instances uses a lot of different types of processors, but we compared that with a E5 2640, I believe, with the double extra large instance, and you can actually see the average is really the focal point here. You're getting better performance on that hardware-based processor that isn't shared. The next test we did was a disk I/O benchmark, and again, there's the Sysbench test, and we ran across a huge performance boost with our SSD drives. You can see that the minimum for Amazon Web Services was actually really good, but the average was so high compared to what we were seeing with reads and writes. And this is also a read and write test. So that's the I/O benchmark that we did. So if you're asking about support, what about support? Well, we do have a full team here in our Fayetteville headquarters. It's fully staffed with live people. We have certified engineers and technicians that are available around the clock to be able to support whether you need direct assistance with building a VM or you would like us to set up an environment for you and give you some best practices. We can do that as well. So as little or as much support as you need with that dedicated private cloud. And I'll turn my attention at this point to our chat section to see if we have any questions. At the moment, I'm not seeing any questions from anybody. I'll wait just a minute to see if there's any questions. Okay, not seeing any questions. We will go ahead and close this webinar. We thank you for attending, and again, this will be up on our YouTube site here in just a few days. If you have any questions, Mike and my contact info is listed here. Feel free to email us, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.